Welcome to Rising from the Rubble, the podcast where we share real life stories of people who have faced life-changing events like burnout, redundancy, and depression, and found a way to rise stronger than before. I'm your host, Maria Newman, and as a coach, I help individuals navigate life's toughest transitions. Whilst listening to this podcast, you'll hear inspiring stories and coaching insights that will empower you to reclaim your confidence, redefine your future, and rise from your own rubble. It's now time to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to our episode. Hello, Sally. Thank you for joining me today. So, what makes your story meaningful to others?
Well, I think it's that I'm just literally an ordinary person who decided to make some big changes. And I think there's a lot of ordinary people who would like to make some change.
Who will benefit the most from hearing your story?
I think people who know that they want to do something different than they are doing now. And maybe they're thinking, how do I do that? Should I do it? Why? And they're just in that stage. I think those are the people it'd be really helpful for.
And what's the most important takeaway from your experience?
Resilience. I think resilience is the biggest thing that you can have as a life skill if you want to make things to change.
So, Sally, tell us, what is your story?
Well, let's start at the beginning. My children were, I can't think exactly how old they were, but they were certainly in the pre-teens phase of life. I've got two of them, and they're very lovely. But at that point in time, when my children were small, I was solo parenting them, and I decided that I didn't really want to carry on the life path I was on. So I'd got the two children, I was looking after them. I had a full-time job where I was an accounts assistant, credit controller, working in an office, and I decided I didn't want that life anymore. So that's where I was, and I used to go into my office. I used to literally take my children to childcare, drop them off at 8 o'clock every morning, used to drive down to the office, and then I used to rush through the door. Everything was always a big rush. Get into work, do a day's work, rush home to try and get the children before childcare closed at 6 o'clock in the evening. You got fined if you were late picking your children up as well, which at £10 each, it started to stack up. And I was just like, I am always rushing from place to place to place, take children home, give them their food, bath, bed, story time, get up and do it all over again. And I was like, I really didn't want to really carry on with that as a routine. What I wanted to do was make my time a bit more flexible, a bit more focused on the children, and have a life that I had time to enjoy. So one day, this was the trigger that set things off. Finally, I'd seen a problem to do with photography, and I knew that I wanted to perhaps start a photography business, and it was all to do with the early days of the internet. And I went into the office one day, and it was about 20 to 9 in the morning. And I remember my boss, we had this open plan office, and she stood up and she literally said, "You're late. Why are you late?" And I remember being really, really taken aback and thinking, I'm not late. I said to her, I actually don't start till 9 o'clock. My hours are 9 o'clock start. And she said, well, you are late because you're always in at 8:30 in the morning. So you're late. I know. And I was just like, well, this is ridiculous, because they're so used to me coming in and doing this job and giving my heart and soul to it, that actually on a day when I'm a little bit later than normal because of the traffic, but not actually physically late. And I remember thinking at that point, I'm done. I am done. If someone can speak to me like that in front of the office, then and not apologize afterwards as well, and just kind of go, oh well, I thought you were late. I was like, I think I think I'm done with this. I want a life which I can enjoy. And that was not it. So that was the trigger to me saying, right, okay, what can I do that is going to change this situation? And it wasn't going to be to get another job. Because with children that age, 20 odd years ago, it was actually a very different scene with children. And, to book off things like orthodontist appointments, you had to book like 3 months in advance and hope that none of your other colleagues are on holiday. And now I think there's a lot more flexibility with parenting, and things like childcare. But back then it was really, you're in the office, if you want time off to do something with the children, you can book it as a holiday. And it was very inflexible. And I thought, actually, getting another job isn't going to be it. So that was the start of it all. And then I'd seen this photography problem. I was not a photographer, but I knew how to kind of handle a camera and take photos. And I'd seen that what the problem was, that people that were starting their businesses and putting them onto the internet, it was the very early days of people having a website, and it was more like putting a calling card up on a website. And the biggest problem was not putting words up, but putting pictures up. Because the photographers were still shooting on film, and they were still giving companies massive files that were like so big you couldn't put them on a web page back then. They had to actually be really tiny, bad quality photos to have used them then. And I figured out that if I could do some training in the photography, that I could fill that gap for people. And also it would take like, a month or so for people to get their photos back. So I spent a little bit of time doing some photography training, just going to courses, going to places. I went to Wales for one, and learning about food photography and all sorts of things. And then I bought this camera that was one of the best cameras that you could get at that particular time, which I've still got it, but it's like the smallest little files you get out of it now, and you wouldn't even think about using it as a professional photographer nowadays. But I'd got this camera, and I went and finished learning how to do specific things for businesses. And then I started telling people, I can come to you, which was another thing. Back then you had to go to the photographers. I will come to you. I will photograph your business, your people, the things you're selling, your buildings, anything you want photographing. And I will get your photos to you within 24 to 48 hours. And they will be the right size for you to be able to put on your new website without any hassle. And it just went an absolute storm. So I was doing that part-time. I was trying to do it in holidays. I was doing it weekends. And I knew after this conversation with my boss in the office that I was literally done. So a few weeks after this incident, I put my house on the market. And I knew as well, I was in a very good school catchment area. It was a nice house, and I knew it would go fast. And it literally, it went within a week. It was sold. And it took the usual amount of time. You just go through all the processes of moving. But this was 2009, and we were just in the middle of a very economically unstable period of time. And I wasn't convinced about whether the sale would go through or not, even though it sold really quickly and there was quite a big chain. And I knew that I wanted to rent for a while while I figured out how things were going to work. So I didn't even look for anywhere to rent. It was probably about 2 weeks before I knew the sale was going to go through, that I went onto a holiday cottage website, and I booked a holiday cottage for 2 weeks following when I knew that the house was supposed to go through and the sale was going to be complete. And then I arranged for everything else to go in storage. And that was it. That was my plan. So on a lovely Tuesday, I remember it, a Tuesday in September 2009, I'll always remember just looking around the house. The house had been cleared of all our stuff. It was all in storage. There was big lorries outside. And I remember we were finished with the house, and I just walked through this empty house. The kids had already gone and popped themselves in the car. I had their computer for homework. We had the goldfish, which was like our pet. And we had like a case of clothes each, and that was all we had. And I just closed that door on the house, and the storage, the big storage removal lorries are gone. And I got in the car with the kids and we just drove off.
So the thing you haven't mentioned is where were you? Because this is significant. Where were you and where were you actually going?
What do you mean? Where was I? Was
So at the time when you sold the house, where were
Yeah,
you living?
in Warwickshire.
And where were you moving to?
Well, I didn't know. We just literally went to a holiday cottage that was about a few miles, well, it was a few miles up the road.
Oh, okay. So you're still in Warwickshire.
Yes, I was still in Warwickshire, technically not in the school catchment area anymore, but through a kind of one of these coincidences, I was chatting to the postman about how was I going to get my post redirected to somewhere where I didn't have an address. And that was a bit of a pain in the rear end because what was I going to do with it? I couldn't have it redirected to a holiday cottage. And bless him, he will remain anonymous because what he said was, I'll hold your post at the sorting office because I always sort your post. I'll hold it at the sorting office. We're not supposed to do that. But as long as you pop in 2 or 3 times a week and come and get it from me, then everything will be fine. So every now and again, once the kids had gone to school, I used to go into the sorting office and just ring on the little bell, and he used to pop out with my post for me. Well, that would no way would that even happen now. And he was just so sweet because there was nothing that I could do to have it redirected anywhere. I didn't know anybody that would have it. And I was scared to death of telling anybody what I'd done because if school found out I wasn't actually in the catchment area anymore, I was a bit worried and I didn't know when I was coming back into it again. And I was a bit worried that actually school were going to be, you can't be doing this. So I didn't tell anybody what I'd done at all, apart from the
Right.
postman.
So well, I think we just need to summarize because there's a lot of stuff that's happened there. I mean, there will be people who are listening to this who probably are in their job having a similar experience to you in the sense of they feel like they're on autopilot and they're just taking the children to school or childcare, working, and then going and picking the children up, making the tea, and going to bed. And on that treadmill, thinking this is not a life. And yet, for you, you realised that this was not the life you wanted, and for you, the trigger point was your boss saying you're late. Do you think if that hadn't have happened, you would still be there now? Or do you think if that wasn't the trigger point, it would have been another one?
It would have been another one for sure. I think if it hadn't have happened at that particular point, it probably would have happened even a few weeks later. And I probably would have made the same decision that in order to start the business, I needed to get the funding, which basically was some of the money from the house. And I would have done it anyway. And I'll tell you why, is because I used to sit across, we had these little blue cubicles in this open plan office. And if I put my head up, I could see the lady I worked opposite. She was called Lisa. If you're listening, Lisa, you also helped me in this decision. And I remember putting my head up and saying to Lisa from time to time, because it used to be near Birmingham, and we used to see the planes coming in, going into Birmingham Airport and coming back out again. And I used to say to Lisa, where do you think those planes are going? Do you ever sit here and wonder, where are they going? Why are we not on that plane? Where are they going? Is there a life out there? And I remember saying to her, we had these conversations where I'd say, do you think we could just do like a film and go to the airport with our credit cards and a little bag and say, first plane out of here and just go and have an adventure? And bless her, she always used to put up with me having these conversations with her that I don't think she really thought the same way, but she was ever so sweet about it. And I think that in my heart, I knew that there was more of life out there for me. What that looked like, I didn't really know. And I do think that, yes, that trigger would have happened and it would have been a different time. So what I also didn't say about that financial period of time was I also made a really good decision with the house because when we moved out, we completed and moved out on the Tuesday. The Friday was when Northern Rock went under, and the people buying my house had 110% mortgage with Northern Rock. And if we hadn't have completed by the Thursday night, we wouldn't have completed and gone through, and that house sale wouldn't have gone through. And I just had this feeling. And I think that's another thing, really, that we know ourselves. Like I say, I know there would have been another trigger. I know that, in my heart that that was always going to happen. But I also had this feeling about the economic situation as well. And I think you've got to trust that gut instinct as well.
See, that's amazing. So as a mum, knowing you've got your two children, you're gonna change life as you know it. For you, was this a risky thing that you were walking into, or was it something else?
No, I knew it was a big risk. I think for me, there was sort of externally, if you like, I knew it was risky because, would we be able to go and buy another house? There was lots of other things involved in that. Um, but I think my biggest internal struggle was about the children. What would happen? Would this be the right thing? That's why I was determined not to tell anybody about school until we were settled somewhere. And to just try and keep things looking like a semblance of order. We spent the next 10 weeks moving from holiday cottage to holiday cottage, all roughly within Warwickshire. I think we didn't go out of the county, and keeping it really quiet that we were moving around, until we got a house to rent, and it was in the school catchment area. So for those 10 weeks, we moved from place to place. And I think there was a lot of internal struggle, mostly in that period of time. Beforehand, I was like, what's going to happen? Are the children going to look back on this and think, oh my God, what did mum do? At the time, they were massively excited. It was a huge adventure. But I thought, in the future, will they look back and think that that was not a good thing to have happened in their childhood? And I think the biggest struggle for me was in those 10 weeks, because I still had a month where I left to work, because I handed in my notice the day after we moved and left 4 weeks later. So the first 4 weeks I was still working in a full-time job, still, sort of driving around the place, dropping the kids off, going to school. So to all intents and purposes, it looked like life was still the same. But I think internally it was, really, are the children going to be adversely affected by this? And that was my biggest worry, because I was very excited as well. So it was always this like scary excitement that goes on. And the excitement was for myself and what I thought we could build for the future for myself and the children. But the internal thing was like, this is a huge risk. Have I done the right thing?
So how did you coach yourself through it? Because obviously within those 10 weeks, having an amount of uncertainty around the future and coming out the other side and doing really well, how did you coach yourself? Because you would have been coaching yourself through that period.
Partly, but also I took the kind of the ostrich approach of sticking one's head in the sand quite firmly and deciding not to listen. And I also think it's not a bad technique, because some of the time you just need to get on with it. And I don't advocate like doing that all the time, but I think sometimes you need to have a firm word with yourself and say, it will be fine. So it's kind of coaching, and then ignoring all the other things that are going on around you. I think, no, I'm just going to keep on the same path. Maybe it should be more like blinkers than putting my head in the sand. But, you've got to keep going on the path. And I'd set myself very firmly on this trajectory. It was too late. I could not turn around and go back. I had definitely burnt most of my bridges. We now didn't have a house. I didn't have a job. And I'd burnt my bridges with my job and I handed my notice in for sure. There was no way I could go back in and tell them that I wanted my job back. That was not going to be a thing. So I think I'd set myself, and it was like I'd launched myself. So some of it had a momentum to itself, but I think a lot of that, and then the following early years of the photography business, I think most of the coaching myself went on between about 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning. or I'd wake up with this huge amount on my mind and not to be able to sleep. Um, but I thought a lot of it was really, like you say, I suppose you could call it coaching yourself. I was just like, what's the next thing I have to do? I need to get up in the morning. I need to make sure the kids get to school, and then I need to do X, Y, and Z for the day. So I think it's not really looking, it wasn't look at that point, it wasn't looking too far ahead. It was literally looking at what's going to happen tomorrow. We need to earn enough money by the end of the day to be able to pay for what we need. So it started out like that, really.
It also sounds like you were fully committed. All right, you sort of had to be. And I think sometimes in life, when we make decisions, the reason why it doesn't necessarily go according to plan is because there's that slight hesitation. Instead of going, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go and do it and fully commit, we just go into it lukewarm and then potentially wonder why it didn't go according to plan. And that's the lesson I'm taking from you, that if you want something to flourish, all right, it comes with the risks, and the inner critic starts talking to you and you have to like say it's all right. However, if you want to do something, you just got to go and do it.
Yes, and I don't think it needs to necessarily be a massively big change like this. But I think what you're saying is right, that you're absolutely correct, that even if it's something that is seemingly quite small, like starting an exercise habit, for example, you don't necessarily need to sell your house and drive off into the sunset with your children in the car, having sold everything and handed your notes in for your job. If you are as committed to starting that exercise routine as you are to doing something like I did, then actually that's where the success lies. And it doesn't mean to say that you won't have problems, because sometimes I think you're right. If we don't fully commit to something, we create a different set of problems, and we kind of create those ourselves in a way. But it doesn't mean to say that things won't go wrong. But what it does mean is in your heart, you've made the right decision. So then if you go back to things like resilience, grit, determination, I think that those are very undervalued skills in life. And I think if you're then saying, no, I made the right decision, I decided to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go running each day because I want to do this. This is how I want to feel. I want my life to be. And like you said, you've made that commitment and that decision to do it. Then your grit, determination, and you will learn resilience will go through. And it doesn't mean to say you won't get injured, you won't get sick. It won't be snowing sideways and you can't actually go out running because you don't want to run in your skis. That things will still happen. But because you've made that decision and the commitment to it, I think it's easier to see your way through it, and to determination. I'm going to make a word up about that, but you get through it because of the determination that you have, for sure. And
And
I think,
did you have anybody around you helping you, or were you literally, this is Sally taking life by the,
short and curlies.
yeah, and just going, right, I've made a decision, I'm standing by the decision, and I can do this for myself and for my kids?
Yeah, there wasn't anybody else that I can think of that even thought that I was slightly sane. Some people stopped talking to me. Um, it was like some people definitely distanced themselves in this kind of like, well, we'll wait and see if this works out. I think a lot of people had no clue what to say. They were like, you're mad. You are utterly lost the plot now. Because you don't have, I know one of the things that I was told regularly, you don't have your investment in the house, not having property investment, going to a rented place. There was a lot around that people said, oh, we're really worried that this is what you're doing. It's very unstable for the children, as well. We actually stayed in that rented house for 9 years, by the way. So instability was not something that I was building for them or for myself. There was instability around the income from the business because, it's very up and down and some of it's seasonal. but they had a very stable existence. So people sort of drifted back a little bit after a while and started going, oh yeah, we're not associating ourselves with a complete disaster area. But it was me. And there wasn't a lot of support. I did have some support from, a handful of people, mostly friends who, if I needed extra childcare or if I needed to go away overnight for a job or something, would have the children. But that was it really. And I have to say that their dad was very supportive of having the children, as well. So it wasn't that I couldn't rely on him to have the children for a weekend or those sorts of things. So I have to say, to be fair to him, he was very supportive with the children, but definitely thought that I'd lost the plot. 100%.
See, if your story isn't inspirational enough, the fact that you literally did this by yourself, if there is anybody listening to this who is thinking, well, I want to make a change, but I can't possibly do it because I don't have enough money and I don't have a support system around me, then actually your story just shows that you don't necessarily have to have the finances in place or have a support system in place to make the change that you know is right for you.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier if you have both of those things in
Yeah.
place. It makes it much, yeah, it definitely makes it much simpler. You put a lot less pressure on yourself, and if you've got supportive people, it would be so much easier, for sure, 100%. But if you haven't, I don't think that it necessarily needs to be the stopping factor. I also think, there's some people who are going to be in some incredibly bad situations here who are desperate to make a change. And I think there is some support for people who want to make a change, so to get out of a really difficult situation. For example, I wasn't in a difficult situation where, I felt threatened or anything like that. It was a lifestyle change, if you like. And I think that, there is support for people who need to make a change, who know they need to make a change, but actually feel quite trapped, because finances, can be a really big deal for somebody who doesn't, say, have access to their own money, and not being in control of that. I was single before I did this. So I wasn't leaving, say, a stable relationship or a relationship I didn't want to be anymore and not having my own money. I'd been working for a lot of years, under my own steam, as it were. So I'd already kind of set that up. And I know that there will be people who will think, yeah, that's quite a privileged situation to be in. And in some ways it is. I had a job, I had income, I knew how to control that. But it's all about making that decision to do it, really, and knowing, there's never going to be a perfect time. Of that I am convinced, but I'm sure that there will be a trigger for some people that will be, that's it, I'm done. And when you're done.
So I now want you to talk specifically to that individual who is sat there saying, this isn't what my life is supposed to be like. What advice do you give them in having the courage to make the decision that's the best decision for them?
I think knowing what you would like it to be like, is definitely a help. Because if I'd have launched myself off without knowing that there was a specific area of the business that I wanted to grow and to see if that could work, I knew that I could make some money out of that. So it wasn't that I was just, packing my kids into the car and driving off without any kind of vision of what it was going to look like. So I think, first of all, having an idea of, what would you like your life to look like? And I think that's part of it, for sure. Um, because you're not gonna make the decision to do it if you don't know what you're aiming for. I think if it's just like, oh, I don't want this. Well, fine, what do you want? I think that's really a big stepping point for people. Do you want to stay in a similar work? Do you want to go to work because you're not already? Do you want to, live in a different part of the country? What does your life look like? And I think the more that you can actually see that and start to get excited about it, the more likely you are to say, right, okay, here's an opportunity. And I think you've always got to look for the opportunities for change as well. You know, you might be thinking, oh, I've got this dream of what my life needs to look like. That's only stage one. We could live with that dream and never do it. But I think then starting to look for the opportunities, how can I actually start to make this happen? And like I said, that could be that it's a small change. It may not be that you need to do everything in one go and completely blow your life up. But it might be that you need to start talking to people that you maybe want to negotiate with. So say you've got a partner and you want to live in a different part of the country. I always wanted to live by the sea. I am doing that now, but I didn't have to negotiate with anybody about that. So maybe other people are like, right, now I need to start saying, oh, look, can we go live by the sea? Here's the benefit to it. You know, you need to start looking for the opportunities, if you have got people in your life, really, to do that. So I think you kind of need to have the dream, look for the opportunities, and then start making moves towards the action. Now, I've told you before, Maria, because Maria and I, you know, obviously we've had a few chats before. So I used to do a lot of long distance running. And I think for me, it's a really good analogy that you start with this vision. You know, you want to run a half marathon, run a marathon, but maybe you're not running already. So the first thing you actually have to do is start looking for the opportunities to, you know, can I start running? Is there a Couch to 5K group locally? There's an opportunity. And then I need to rock up every week and actually go and do it. So I think there's always this thing, and you don't go straight into, right, I'm now going to go and run half a marathon. You have to start where you are, have the dream, start looking for the opportunity to get to it, and then actually start to take the action. So it's kind of always like a 3-part thing, I think. And then eventually you build up to where you're going, even if that is then, blowing everything up completely. It's not necessarily, you know, it's not going to be for everybody, this approach, but you have to do the approach that I think is right for you, for sure. Yeah. But don't put yourself out of it by saying, oh, I couldn't do that. You can do an awful lot more than you think you are, that you're capable of. And you might be thinking, I'd love to, like say, run a marathon. I'd love to do that, but I don't even run yet. You know, you are capable of doing it. You just need to, you know, make the decisions to actually, you know, put it in place to do it.
Exactly. And as quick as a flash, we have actually come to the end of our episode together. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
However, before we go, listeners will be thinking, Sally, she is amazing. She is an inspiration. I need to be in Sally's world. Sally, how can people connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is actually through LinkedIn.
And that's simply Sally Evans?
It's Sally Evans Copywriter, I think it is, on there. So if you have a look and you Google, if you go to LinkedIn and you search for Sally Evans Copywriter, I should come up on that. And then one day I'll tell you all about the story of why it says copywriter on the end.
Well, thank you very much, Sally, for being with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been amazing. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Thank you for listening to Rising from the Rubble. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Also, remember to download your free life assessment. Just click the link in the description to get started. Take care, and remember, every setback is an opportunity for growth. I'll see you next time.